Yeah, when I spoke of tent shows, Tent, I mean, old time preaching in the South was done in revivals under a tent. You came like a circus and you erected the tent and you had this thing there for 5 or 6 days and then you moved on. And it was called a revival. I don't even know if they had them up north like that. Probably in stadia or things like they do now. That was Van Koevering's background, and he certainly had that fervor that was needed for the early task of doing this. And when I was at the Moog plant then working with him about 1972, I was in charge of modular systems, and I did this divide up territories and make sure you don't bid against each other kind of idea, which was just kind of sub rosa. I mean, I didn't write any letters or anything. I just told them, you have to do it this or none of you are going to make any money. So there had been a lot of sales of synthesizers in the late 60s. And again, this crystal ball thing I have that I'm somewhat proud of, I had actually told Bob Moog when I interviewed him, I said, well, what are you going to do after this modular thing you've got now? He said, well, what do you mean? We're selling $100,000 a month. And I said, yeah, but you can't keep that up. He says, why not? I said, well, I mean, there's only so many people that have $15,000. So Bob was not highly attuned to marketing. He was very good at entrepreneurialism, in my opinion. And again, I can buttress that contention. But at any rate, it wasn't a few months that the bottom did drop out. And I think there might have been some larger economic issues in the country. I don't remember the timing exactly. But basically, they had nowhere to go. They designed the Mini Moog. Van Koevering says that when he asked Bob, well, how many of these do you think you're going to build? Bob reportedly said 50 or so. And Dave immediately said, I'll buy the first 50. Now, what was their relationship, Bob Moog and David Van Koevering? Even prior to that, Van Koevering had come up to the Moog plant and sold Bob on the idea of providing the equipment, a Moog 12, as I recall, in a few pieces and a keyboard, so that Dave and Becky Van Koevering could go to Taco Bell's, a chain restaurant in the United States, and put on this wild and woolly musicology show. Well, where did that come from? Well, Dave's father had been like a vaudeville player. He had Deegan coins and sleigh bells that were tuned and rocks that were tuned. And Dave came right along in that tradition and played all of that as part of his show. He added the Moog synthesizer, basically. It's like, well, look, here's some new, wild and crazy thing, like the other wild and crazy vaudeville stuff that I've got. I'll add that to the show. Apparently, Dave began to understand, regular contemporary musicians could use this and should. And as they say, that's kind of how history happened. A very tenuous connection at first. And then, Dave became director of marketing. And in terms of modules, which I was in charge of, even though by now I'd written the Mini Moog manual up at the Moog plant and was living there. And they found out, oh my God, he can sell Mini Moog. So they started sending me around. It wasn't my design. It wasn't my job title, but, the tiny, tiny little company, everybody does everything. I mean, I one of the first things I did at the Moog company was prepare a brochure for a trade show. They asked me on one Thursday, could you have a brochure done by Tuesday? And I said, well, yeah, sure, of course. I had to went away sweating bullets thinking, I don't know how I'm going to do that. And I went to Vaco and I said, Van Koevering. And I said, well, who do we have? Well, we got Bob Gadash over here. He does the art and he's a crazy, wild and crazy guy. So that's how I started helping to publish my own owner's manuals and so forth. Very vertical organization to the extent that I wound up doing everything: artist relations, advertising, wholesale, retail, and training, manual writing, just everything, for which I'm profoundly grateful. Because in the industry now, the instrument industry, you have a specialist that does artist relations. You have an advertising house that does Buicks and Fords and your instrument. I was there sufficiently on the ground floor that I got to do everything. Great fun. Now, what Vanco did then, Van Koevering, is as soon as he became director of marketing, he recognized we don't have a strong enough presence in Europe. And he made some changes domestically, but also he made all of these beachheads in Europe, Monzino in Italy, and I forget the outfit if you mentioned it. Dallas Arbiter, I think was the first one. Don't hold me to that. That, I'm a little hazy about which the companies they were. And anyhow, Van Koevering established these beachheads all over Europe. And of course, sales grew. And then I became quite instrumental in establishing a beachhead in Australia. I went there twice, 5 weeks at a time. And as I'm fond of saying, they still have my name on my picture on the post office wall. Have you seen this man? We want him. Because I must have sold about 300 Sonic 6s, which was known affectionately and colloquially at the Moog plant as the Chronic Sick, not the Sonic 6. That instrument, as a matter of fact, was never really a Moog product. It came from the old Musonics company that Bill Waytena had funded, and a couple of guys he hired kind of off the cuff that would come in and get paid that week and go away, and they made this design. It was 5 volts per octave, which was not the standard that we were moving toward of 1 volt per octave. And when Waytena took over the Moog Enterprise and moved it to Buffalo rather than out in the sticks, to an old glue factory, as a matter of fact, in Williamsville, New York, where they had rendered horses, literally. It was a glue factory. And still had the vats out in the other buildings. We were in there. I worked there. But Van Koevering had this incredible energy and presence, and just wasn't going to take no for an answer. And essentially made synthesizers go all over Europe. I helped. I went over and trained some of their people. Val Podlasinski, who became Val Joseph. He took that name. Roy Gowdy then came on board. Different places, and those people proselytized and spread this word, through many demonstrations. And I did weeks at a time in Europe, weeks at a time in Australia. Dave, in the same model basically that Van Koevering had done, putting mini Moogs into his Cadillac and going out and standing on the floor until he sold one to convince dealers, yeah, this is viable. It's the next big thing, which of course it has been.
So what instruments did you take around when you
did my demo?
Yeah.
My
Sonic 6 or?
I did everything. I mean, and usually by the time I came along, most dealers had one of everything. And that was the deal. If you're going to have Tom Ray do a clinic, you can't sell from an empty cart. We're not going to bring instruments in. You have to believe enough in this that, you'll buy at least one of. And in some cases, it was exactly that, one of. In some cases, they were quite viable. In New York, Sam Ash, Manny's, the big dealers had gotten into it with a vengeance and realized, oh, yeah, we can make money doing this. And they did. So usually my role would be to come in as the visiting fireman, and things would be pretty much set up, and I'd give her my shtick and so forth. So I sold mini Moogs, Sonic 6s, micro Moogs, multi Moogs, that entire era before we hired a couple of other demonstrators, and I kind of got pulled up into marketing a little higher up in the organization. I would like to recognize somebody at this point about demonstrations and stuff. A number of people have claimed being the first Moog clinician or Moog demonstrator. The first Moog demonstrator or clinician was Chris Swansen. End of story. That's who it was. Because Chris, a fabulous musician who died prematurely, I hate to say, a fabulous musician and a great performer, and showed people with the old Moog ribbon how to do pitch bending before there was the wheel on the mini Moog. He was doing this. And I knew Chris quite well. He must have spent hundreds of hours in that basement studio in Trumansburg, New York, showing everybody from Manny Gint to Frank Zappa to whoever came by the plant. And hundreds of musicians must have come by that plant. there was Chris. So he has the honor of being the first clinician, not me. I was very early and very widespread. I went everywhere. But it was Chris. And he was a fabulous musician. There's a couple of albums out where he played with Phil Wilson or Phil Woods. Oh my gosh. Anyway, with a big band and or with a saxophonist, and you'd swear that what's that? Oh my gosh, that's the Moog. I mean, he was really good at that stuff. So the enterprise was pushed forward by a number of forward-thinking people.